The morning was pale and still, the kind of quiet that settles before the world fully wakes. Along the narrow stretch of road, the woman slowed her steps. Just ahead, at the edge where gravel met grass, something small lay against the earth. The shape was wrong for the scattered branches and wind-blown leaves she usually passed. She moved closer, and the stillness of the figure told her more than she wanted to know. A dog, curled but slack, its fur dull with dust. Its chest lifted only slightly, each breath too shallow to be steady. She crouched slowly, her knees pressing into the cold ground. The air here was sharp, touched by the last of the night's chill. She could feel it radiating from the animal's body, the kind of cold that told of hours without shelter. The fur around its ears was matted, the sides of its muzzle faintly grayed with grime. One paw lay twisted under its chest as if it had folded mid-step and never found the strength to rise again. The smell of dry earth lingered with the faint tang of the nearby ditch water. The road remained empty, only the distant hum of a far-off engine somewhere beyond the bend. She reached her hand out slowly, palm low. There was no flinch, only a small shift of the dog's eyes toward her before they half-closed again. It was the smallest acknowledgement, yet it anchored her in the moment. She noticed the faint tremor in its ribs, not from movement, but from the cold, creeping deeper. The woman eased herself down beside it, letting her breath match the pace of its own. She didn't touch it yet, knowing that sudden pressure might startle or sap what little energy it had left. Instead, she let her presence fill the space between them, her shadow sheltering its eyes from the direct light. A soft cloud of dust lifted each time the dog exhaled, disappearing almost before she saw it. Its fur held the scent of road dust and long exposure, not the tang of wildness, but the tired, worn smell of an animal that had known people and lost them. The faint ridge of its spine pressed against the skin, a sign of weeks without enough food. Its ears twitched once at a passing bird call, then fell still again. She leaned closer, her voice barely above the air. "It's all right," she said, not expecting an answer, only wanting the sound to exist here. A small pulse of warmth seemed to leave her with the words, reaching toward the dog as much as the cold would allow. Her fingers hovered above its side, feeling the weak rhythm of its breathing. The gravel beneath them still held the night's chill, but the sun was beginning its slow climb. Light slid across the road in thin layers, touching the outline of the dog's body before settling on its fur. The woman watched as a single speck of dust drifted away from its flank, turning in the light before disappearing into the air. It was a small thing, but she felt the fragility of it, the balance between this moment and what could follow. The world remained quiet around them. No footsteps, no rush of vehicles, just the faint hum of the day beginning in the distance. The dog's breathing slowed for a moment, then caught again, a stutter that made her lean forward instinctively. She let her hand settle gently against the edge of its ribs this time, barely any pressure, just enough to feel the movement. Beneath her palm, the rise and fall continued, fragile but present. She stayed there, knees pressed into the ground, holding the stillness with the animal. The pale morning widened across the sky, and the shadow they shared shifted slowly toward the ditch. The dog did not move, but it no longer seemed entirely lost to the cold. Its body accepted her nearness, the air between them warmer now than when she had first stopped. In that quiet, the road was simply a place they both waited, the dust lifting in small, weightless spirals with every breath. She moved without pausing to think, her hands going to the zipper of her jacket. The morning air clung to her skin, but she ignored the bite of cold as she pulled the fabric free. It was thick from years of wear, the inside lined with a soft layer that still held her body's heat. She folded it once in her arms, then leaned over the dog, lowering it slowly until the weight settled over its small frame. The cloth draped loosely across the curve of its back and sides, dipping with the shallow rise and fall of its ribs. For a moment, there was no reaction. The dog's head remained pressed to the ground, its muzzle dusted with the pale grit of the roadside. Then, beneath the jacket, the skin twitched faintly, almost like the shiver of leaves under a thin wind. She adjusted the fabric gently, tucking it in just enough to keep the heat from escaping, her fingers brushing against the ridges of bone beneath the fur. The warmth was slight, but here, so close to the cold earth, it mattered. The air around them felt different now, less sharp, edged with the soft heat trapped beneath the jacket. She could feel it when her hand rested near the animal's side, a faint pocket of shelter in the open space of the road. A slow blink moved across the dog's eyes, lids parting just enough for her to see the dull brown beneath. They were not bright, but they were open, and in this quiet place, that felt like a beginning. Her voice was low, almost as if speaking would break something delicate between them. "Stay with me," she murmured. The words carried no command, only the steady rhythm of calm. The dog's ears shifted, one folding slightly under the weight of the jacket, the other twitching at the sound. Its breathing deepened, no longer catching as sharply between each rise. Around them, the light grew warmer. The sun lifting over the far hedgerow, dust in the air caught the light in faint streaks, turning slowly before settling again. A bird called once from a fence post, then fell silent. She adjusted her knees on the gravel, careful not to jar the dog, and placed her palm lightly on the fabric-covered ribs. The movement beneath was small but steady, like the first faint taps of rain before a storm builds. The jacket's weight gave the dog something to rest against, a soft boundary between its body and the open air. She noticed the way its paws, once stiff and cold, began to ease slightly. Claws no longer curled as tightly into the ground. The fur along its neck was warmer now, the skin beneath giving off the faintest trace of heat against the fabric. The road remained empty, the only sound the shifting of fabric when she adjusted it to fit more closely around the dog's body. In that quiet, the world seemed narrowed to this circle of shared warmth. Time moved differently here, each minute holding its own careful balance. She knew nothing of where the animal had come from or how long it had lain here, but in this moment, the past was as distant as the far-off hum of another car turning somewhere out of sight. She stayed crouched beside it, letting her own body block the wind that stirred now and again from the fields. The fabric moved with the dog's breaths, small hills rising and falling in an uneven rhythm. Every now and then, a flicker passed through its eyes, a faint adjustment, the kind of awareness that slips in when a body begins to remember it is alive. The woman kept her hand where it was, steady and patient, feeling that rhythm deepen beneath her palm. She could sense the air within the folds of the jacket growing warmer still, a slow gathering of life in the space between fabric and fur. Somewhere in that warmth, the dog's gaze lifted enough to meet hers for a brief, unsteady second before slipping closed again. The moment was small, but it was enough. The minutes stretched quietly, the kind that seemed to hold their breath along with the living thing beneath the jacket. She stayed beside the dog without moving, her knees pressed into the gravel, one hand resting gently on the rise of its covered ribs. The warmth beneath the fabric was building in small degrees, each one almost imperceptible, yet the change felt present, like a tide shifting far below the surface. The dog's eyes stayed closed, its breathing faint but no longer faltering, each exhale lifting the jacket in the smallest of motions. Then it came, not sudden, but noticeable enough to catch her stillness. A faint tremor passed through the dog's front paw, the movement more a ripple than a jolt. It was as if some hidden thread had loosened, allowing energy to move again. Her gaze shifted to its face. The muscles along the muzzle quivered once, and the faintest sound left its throat. Not a bark, not even a whimper, but the low vibration of air that spoke of a body remembering itself. She leaned closer, her voice no more than a breath. "Easy now," she murmured. The sound seemed to settle in the air between them, as steady and careful as her touch. She adjusted the jacket again, pressing it closer to the body with slow, deliberate movements, tucking warmth around its paws where the cold still lingered. The tremor came again, this time followed by a shallow stretch of the toes. It was not strength, not yet, but the first sign of muscles waking after stillness. Her fingers brushed the edge of its fur where it peeked from the cloth, warmer now, less brittle beneath her touch. She could feel the faint pulse in the narrow space between her hand and the earth. The fields around them remained quiet, the only sound the thin hiss of wind sliding through dry grass. A leaf skittered across the road, catching briefly against the jacket before rolling away. She didn't move to stop it. All her focus was on the slow rhythm of the dog's breath. Each rise seemed just a little fuller than the one before, each fall followed by a more certain return. The dog's ear twitched again, sharper this time in response to a distant noise, maybe another bird, maybe the soft rattle of a fence in the wind. Its eyes parted slightly, the dull brown inside catching a shard of light before drifting closed again. It was not readiness, but it was awareness, and that was enough for her to keep waiting. Her knees ached from holding still on the hard ground, but she didn't shift. Movement might break the fragile thread connecting this slow recovery to the warmth seeping deeper into the animal's body. She could feel her own heat leaving her through the fabric, mingling with the sun's growing reach. The tremors became less random, more like tentative adjustments, a faint flex of one paw, a slow settling of the head to a more comfortable angle. She let her hand trace a light line down the side of the jacket, smoothing it once more over the thin rise of the ribs. Underneath, the breathing was steadier now, each inhale followed by a pause before the exhale returned to the air. Somewhere beyond the bend in the road, the distant hum of a vehicle grew louder, then faded again without passing. The world remained just them and the small, stubborn rhythm beneath her palm. She stayed where she was, speaking only once more, the words carried as much by the air as by her voice. "You're doing fine." The dog didn't respond in any obvious way, but the warmth between fabric and fur was holding, deepening. She kept her hand there, steady as the sun crept higher, waiting for whatever movement might come next. The low hum of an engine grew in the distance, steady and unhurried. She didn't look up at first. Unwilling to break the quiet that had settled between her and the dog, but the sound came closer, rolling over the gravel until a faded pickup slowed beside them. The window eased down, and a man leaned slightly toward the open air, his eyes scanning the small shape at her side. There was no need for many words. The situation was clear enough. He stepped out carrying a folded blanket from behind his seat, the fabric worn but thick, still holding the scent of clean cotton. In his other hand was a small bottle of water, the cap already loosened. He knelt opposite her, lowering himself onto the cold ground with the same care she had used hours before. For a moment, they both stayed still, letting the dog sense the new presence. The animal's head shifted slightly beneath the jacket, one ear twitching toward the sound of the blanket being unfurled. The woman eased back just enough for the man to pour a thin trickle of water into the curve of his palm. He held it low, close to the dog's muzzle. At first, there was no response, only the soft weight of breath against his skin. Then, slowly, the tongue flicked once, then again, lapping weakly before the head sank back into stillness. It was not thirst quenched, but it was a sign, another small thread in the weave of life returning. They worked without speaking more than necessary. She kept the jacket snug while he slid the blanket under the dog's body, moving in small increments so as not to jar its fragile stillness. The fabric gathered the dust from the road, carrying it into folds that would soon hold warmth against the animal's underside. She kept one hand on its flank, feeling each rise and fall as they shifted it together. When the moment came to lift, they moved as one, their hands supporting the thin frame at the chest and hips. The dog's body yielded without resistance, its paws curling slightly as it was raised. She felt the lightness of it, the way the bones pressed close beneath skin and fur, and she cradled the weight as if it might slip away if held too tightly. The jacket stayed wrapped around it, edges tucked under to keep the warmth in place. The man opened the truck's back door, and they laid the dog onto the padded seat, the blanket cushioning its body against the cool vinyl. She adjusted the jacket once more, making sure no wind could reach its ribs. The dog's eyes opened briefly, unfocused but aware, before sliding closed again. Its breathing, though still shallow, was steadier now, the rhythm unbroken. She climbed into the passenger seat while he turned the truck back toward the bend in the road. The landscape began to slide past. The low fields, the leaning fences, the pale dust rising in the wake of their slow speed. She kept her gaze on the shape beside her, watching the subtle lift of fabric with each breath. The road behind them narrowed and faded, leaving only the straight line ahead toward the small rural clinic she knew sat beyond the next ridge. The hum of the engine was the only sound between them, steady and even, like the breathing of the dog in the back seat. She rested her hand on the edge of the seat, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from beneath the jacket, carrying it forward into the next place where help would be waiting. The clinic yard was quiet except for the soft rustle of leaves in the trees lining the fence. The air carried the mild warmth of a late morning, touched with the faint scent of hay from the nearby sheds. She stepped through the gate, the gravel shifting lightly under her shoes. For a moment there was no movement, only the low hum of insects in the sun. Then, from the shaded edge of the building, a small shape emerged. The dog moved with unhurried steps, each one steady and deliberate. Its body was lean but no longer frail, the fur along its back lying smooth except for a patch near its side where the hair had been shaved for treatment. The skin there was pale and clean, marked only by the fine line where a wound had once been closed. Its eyes, clearer now, fixed on her in quiet recognition. She crouched without calling out, letting the space between them close in its own time. The dog's ears shifted forward, its head tilting slightly as it crossed the yard. Its tail did not wag in bursts, but rather swayed slowly, in the same calm rhythm as its steps. The sun caught on the edges of its fur, turning the once dull brown into something warmer, touched with gold. When it reached her, the dog paused, standing close enough for her to see the faint rise of its ribs with each breath. She extended her hand slowly, palm open. The muzzle lowered until it brushed against her fingers, the breath warm and even. For a long moment, neither of them moved. She let her hand rest gently along its jaw, feeling the steady strength there that had not been present on the road. Behind them, one of the clinic staff stepped into view, leaning lightly against the doorframe. "He's been walking the yard every morning," the voice said quietly. She only nodded in reply, her eyes still on the dog. It shifted closer, its shoulder pressing softly into her knee before lowering its head toward the ground. The jacket she had wrapped around him that day was not here, but she remembered its weight in her hands. The way the fabric had held his warmth close when there was so little of it left. The moment in the road had been silent, fragile, and fleeting, but it had carried forward into this one, where sunlight lay across the gravel and the animal before her stood without trembling. She rose slowly, and the dog moved with her, matching her pace as they walked a short stretch of the yard together. Each step was unhurried, the sound of paws and shoes blending into the quiet around them. At the far end, she stopped and knelt again, watching as the dog lifted its head toward the open sky. The leaves in the fence-lined trees swayed in a light breeze, their shadows drifting over the ground. The dog stood still for a moment longer, then looked back toward the shaded edge where it had begun. She let her hand fall to her side, not calling it back. It turned and walked away at the same steady pace, its body outlined by the sun. She stayed where she was until it reached the shade again, the patch of pale skin catching the last bit of light before disappearing into the cool. In the quiet that followed, she knew the moment on the road would remain with her, a small and unshakable image, warmth held close in the cold and life finding its way back.